Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad, bringing you the podcast Capitalism Hits Home, sponsored by Democracy at Work. Today, I want to talk about social reproduction theory. Well, what is social reproduction theory? That's important to know. Social reproduction theory complements Marxist social theory. It points out that Marx talked about industrial production, talked about the world of work, making things, making commodities, trading commodities. Social reproduction theory talks about the making of people, not only pregnancy and childbirth, but also child care and human care, health care, education, nurturance of all kinds, which have been attributed to what they call love and not recognized in terms of work. And there's a lot of work involved. And social reproduction theory talks about the production of people, people's bodies, and people's souls. To use Marx's words, he says, the worker is compelled to offer, for same as a commodity, that very labor power that exists in his living body. Well, social reproduction theory talks about the living bodies and souls and emotions and needs of human beings before they get to work. You know, someone comes to work, they have to be clothed, they have to be fed, they have to be washed, they have to be alert. All those things are part of life that need to be discussed. And the social reproduction theories don't blame Marx, because Marx made a huge contribution. They didn't, nobody could do everything. But social reproduction theory really points to making people, making us ready to be part of the world, maintaining our bodies, our environments, creating physical comfort and physical possibility, as well as things like education. And in terms of adult partners, their sexual needs as well. That exhausting labor that provides for other people's care was subsumed under the title of love. Women who are in love automatically do domestic labor and then childcare and so on, which obscures the idea that this is a lot of work they're talking about, and work that was considered invisible, somehow mystical, commemorated in sentimentality on Mother's Day, but otherwise forgotten. And yet was a lot of labor, and that labor is being called into question across the world. Although they're not really citing it in terms of social reproduction theory or in terms of any particular theory, worldwide, women are opting out of marriage and reducing childbearing and childcaring. They don't want to do work that interferes with their ability to survive and make a decent living and have a profession and is unpaid. What am I talking about? Well, as I said before in other podcasts, the U.S. women are opting out of marriage. For the first time in our history as a nation, the majority of women are not married and by choice. Opting Out is a very good book, and it cites how all over the world women are opting out of marriage. Even women in nations like some African nations where women are considered quite inferior if they don't have a husband, women are deliberately marrying migrants so that they're married, but they don't have a husband that they have to take care of. Societies that are as varied as Singapore, Senegal, Bahrain, Kuwait, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, China, Germany, and Russia, their women are curtailing marriage and childbearing. Now, these changes that women are making without being organized to do this in a particularly deliberate social way, they are threatening the labor supply that countries need in order to have a workforce that creates commodities and power that the government or the capitalists count on. Because without labor power, nothing can function. If you look around your house, I mean, I see sitting here in this chair, some forces group of people made this chair, these rugs, these books, the equipment that records this. There's all kind. People don't live on subsistence that they create themselves. They live on commodities they buy. And they buy commodities because they expend their labor power to get the money to do that. Well, social reproduction doesn't give you any money. Various governments are trying to induce women to get married and have children and labor for very little acknowledgement, no money. First of all, they want them to marry because marriage is more conducive to having children and having a little bit of help in bringing them up. But women are not necessarily listening. The Vice President of the United States, Vance, condemned single women as dried up cat ladies. And he also says that the only use for older women is as babysitters for younger women's children. He even suggested that American women should be fined for not having children. In Russia, the legislators banned propaganda that speaks against having children. All things they call propaganda. So radio programs where mothers called in and talked about the problems they were having with their kids, they're illegal now. You're not allowed to ever discuss in any public forum the difficulties of raising children. Like the US and all over the world, nations are facing aging populations and lower birth rates that threaten the labor force in the future. What they're not doing, sadly enough, is passing legislation that eases the financial and emotional and time-consuming burdens of child and home and personal care that women assume worldwide, because this is a worldwide gender assignment. That women should create life and then maintain everyone's lives. They're also not raising the wages of most of the workers who do most of the reproductive work outside the houses. These are some of the lowest paid workers. Workers like daycare workers, daycare teachers, the lowest paid of all teachers. Home health aides, the lowest paid medical people. Teaching assistants in classrooms, social workers, consultants, counselors, because their work is related to what was considered the invisible and to be taken advantage of and not paid labor of women. Well, what would it be like if we did consider the value of labor that's involved in social reproduction, as well as the labor that's acknowledged in the creation of commodities and services for capitalism? What would be involved? Well, if we recognized that, we could be like some of the top 6 nations in providing that, which happens to be the happiest nations on the World Happiness Index. The UN has a World Happiness Report, and in their latest report, they give a clue of what societies could be like, how happy people could be if we respected social reproduction labor. That report is based on the study of about 150,000 respondents in 146 to 148 nations. The report's rankings of who's the happiest and who's the least are based on the prosperity, the general prosperity, GDP, gross domestic product of the nations, their health, their life expectancy, their generosity with each other, their social support, their freedom, and their perceptions of honesty instead of corruption. The happiest nation in the world, according to the World Happiness Index, is Finland, which is its highlight is its attention to the quality of life, strong social, personal, family support systems, and income equality. The United States gets more unequal every year. The second is Denmark, known for its strong social welfare system, emphasis on equality again, and levels of life satisfaction. The third is Iceland, which is focused on welfare, education, and equality. So, for example, in Iceland, when the recession hit because of the 2008 banking crisis, they gave the people a choice. There was a poll and an election nationwide. Should we cut back on imported sources of all kinds and count on a diet that we can manage here? Or should we borrow and then have to pay it back and get lower salaries and have less work? And they decided to have more work. And as a nation, we'll subsist on what we grow ourselves. They had a choice. Of course, in America, we didn't have that choice. The fourth to happiest is Sweden, which is known and recognized for their quality of life and their strong social safety nets and commitment to work-life balance and satisfaction. The Netherlands are the fifth. Israel used to be the fifth before its war in Gaza, where people have been made very unhappy. The Netherlands is a very powerful force in an emphasis on social trust and care for its own people. In fact, the theme of the whole government for 2025 is sharing and caring. The Dutch excel in that. One of the things they say proudly is if you lose your wallet in Holland, in the Netherlands, it'll be returned. The sixth happiest is Norway. And I think Norway is a prosperous nation with shared wealth. Norway's wealth is in oil production, but instead of being like Saudi Arabia or the United States, where some people get very rich, the oil wealth is shared. Also, they have a good, healthy work-life balance. Norwegians work 27 hours a week on average, whereas in the US, we work 36 hours a week. They have a very strong community sense and a low crime rate. And all of the top 6 happiest countries have low crime rates because people can do well. They're satisfied and they have a sense of community. Although the dominant rulers of the richest and most military nations have repeatedly claimed that they're making their nations great and their people happy, like MAGA. Make America great again. Their policies don't make us great or happy. And that also is noted on the World Happiness Index. They underscore that the levels of unhappiness in the world's major military economic powers are very low. They're unhappy. The world's biggest military spenders are, first of all, the US, which spends 7 times more than any other country. In fact, all the other countries combined. China, second, India, the third largest military spender, and Russia. They account for nearly 59% of the world's military spending and the vast amount of the world's military nuclear weapons. However, they do not account for world happiness. And when nations are rated in terms of happiness, if they're rated by their wealth instead of their military, the same kind of pattern comes out. Once again, their ranking is very similar. The US is one, wealthiest. China is second. India is third. And Russia is fifth. Despite all their different economic models, they all have a share of the world's billionaires and a lot of unhappiness. All that military power and wealth hasn't produced power for their citizens. The most positive things that could be said is, instead of ranking among the world's top 5 or top 10, the US ranks 16th on the World Happiness Scale, China ranks 72nd, Russia 80th, and India 136th on the World Happiness Scale. Furthermore, since the more than a decade before the UN started doing these World Happiness Indexes, none of these major powers has ever appeared among the top 10, no less the top 5 happiest nations or the top 6. Well, why not? Well, the world's happiest nations attend to social reproduction of its people, their mentality, their bodies, their social connection. They prioritize and also socially support their people's well-being and connection. They have extensive maternity leaves and paternity leaves. Norway even forbids men of canceling their paternity leaves to get ahead at work. They have child care subsidies, in some up to 5 years for families, and subsidies for children from infancy through college. Well, college is free in a lot of these. And here I have to say that the United States is only one of 8 nations in the world that don't guarantee paid maternity leave. And all the rest of the nations that don't guarantee it have less than 500,000 in population. They're Papua New Guinea, Suriname, Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Nauru, Palau, and Tonga. The happiest nations are more egalitarian nations in income and with strong social supports. They have strong socialist and or communist movements that make sure that the mass of people's needs are represented. And the push to prioritize benefits that allow the social reproduction of their citizens. We're the world's wealthiest nation in America, and we have the most weapons, even if we lose all the wars. We could be among the world's happiest people. What we need is a unified left socialist movement and a socialist party, whatever it wants to call itself, that insists on social reproduction expenditures and priorities that create happier, more trusting, more unified, more connected, and much more protected people. Thank you. That's all for now, today.